Ever catch yourself kind of wishing you had like a sixth sense for figuring out if someone's, emotionally stable? Like
Yeah.
right away?
Yeah.
Today we're diving deep into Find Out Who's Normal and Who's Not by David J. Lieberman.
Oh.
And that's exactly what we're going to be exploring. Like, it's almost like having a secret decoder ring for human behavior. You're ready to unlock some fascinating insights.
Absolutely. This book is really cool because it gives you... So think of emotional health, like as a house supported by 4 strong pillars. Okay, so the first pillar is self-esteem. And when someone's self-esteem is, really solid, their ego tends to be smaller. But if that pillar is shaky, you often see a bigger, more fragile ego that needs constant attention.
So is it like someone who's bragging or putting others down?
Yeah, exactly.
Would that be a sign of low self-esteem then instead of
Right.
confidence?
It could be.
How can we tell the difference then?
That's where you have to kind of be careful and observe a little more closely. It's about looking for patterns, not jumping to conclusions just based on one little thing you see.
Gotcha.
The second pillar of emotional health is responsibility. Emotionally healthy people, they own their choices and actions, They take responsibility.
I've definitely known people who always have an excuse for why things go wrong. Like never taking any ownership, it gets old.
Exactly. Yeah, and those are the kind of people you want to, watch out for a little bit.
Right.
Now, the third pillar is perspective. It's all about reacting rationally to situations and not letting your emotions completely run the show.
So not having a meltdown when you miss your train or you spill coffee on yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Easier said than done sometimes, but it's about keeping things in perspective.
I get it.
The fourth and final pillar is all about relationships and boundaries. Healthy relationships have clear boundaries where everyone feels respected and safe.
Yeah.
Blurry boundaries can lead to all sorts of problems.
So being able to say no when you need to, not getting sucked into
Yes.
unhealthy dynamics, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. This framework of 4 pillars is a great way to kind of visualize emotional health, I think. But how do we actually apply this in real life? Like, how do we actually assess someone's emotional stability without being, a therapist?
Well, Lieberman introduces a brilliant tool he calls the mental CAT scan. It's basically a quick assessment that's based on observable behaviors and things people say. It's almost like, a detective gathering clues.
Oh, okay. This sounds right up my alley. I love that.
Yeah.
Tell me more about this mental CAT scan.
Okay.
What kind of clues or emotional footprints should we be looking for?
He breaks it down into different levels. So level 1 focuses on simple observation. So things like if they seem distracted, fidgeting a lot, inappropriate dress for the situation, if they have low energy, or even if you see them talking to themselves, those can be indicators.
So if someone shows up for a job interview in a swimsuit,
Right.
like that would be a red flag.
Yeah, it might be a red flag. You always have to consider the context.
Yeah.
Like maybe there was a miscommunication about what they were supposed to wear.
Yeah, true.
But unusual behaviors like that can be worth noting.
Yeah, I like that.
Now, level 2 of the mental CAT scan is all about conversational cues. So like how people talk. So pay attention to how someone communicates. Do they constantly interrupt? Or do they dominate the conversation? Or do they seem evasive? Or are they overly quiet and don't really say much?
So if someone's like holding court at a dinner party and just monopolizing the conversation, could that be a sign of insecurity? Maybe.
It could be.
Not necessarily shyness or just being like a good storyteller.
It might not be. Again, you have to kind of look at the context. But if you see them doing that all the time,
Yeah.
then it could be a sign that something else is going on.
Gotcha. So we're looking for patterns, not isolated incidents.
Exactly.
This is so interesting. It's making me think about how we can become more aware of these subtle signs in our own everyday interactions.
That's a really great point. Lieberman calls this becoming a conversational archaeologist.
Ooh, I love that.
Yeah.
But how do we dig without coming across as intrusive or nosy?
The key is to be indirect. Like, instead of asking direct questions about their personal life, things they might not want to talk about, try asking for their opinions on relatable situations that involve, other people. Like, for example, you could say something like, my friend's partner is always late. How would you feel if your partner did that?
That's so clever. You're not directly asking them about their behavior.
Right.
But their answer can still reveal a lot about, their values.
Yeah.
And how they view relationships. It's almost like a psychological Rorschach test.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, I love that. What are some other conversational archaeology techniques we can use?
You can also casually bring up sensitive topics and just observe their reactions. Do they get defensive, angry? Do they avoid the topic? Or do they engage thoughtfully and want to talk about it? You can even use what they say to ask follow-up questions to kind of get them to elaborate more. So, for example, if they say, "Oh, I hate lateness," you could say, "Oh, have you ever been in a relationship with someone chronically late?" And their answer might reveal a lot about their emotional patterns and how they handle conflict.
This is really giving me a whole new perspective on everyday conversations. I never thought about it that way. It's making me realize how much information we unconsciously reveal through our words and reactions. But how do we know when a behavior is just a harmless quirk versus a genuine red flag?
That's where the concept of red flags and white flags comes in. Imagine you're playing golf. A red flag on the course indicates a hazard, something to be aware of, but not necessarily a deal breaker. A white flag, on the other hand, means out of bounds.
Okay, I like that analogy. So are you saying like multiple red flags together
Yes.
might escalate into a white flag situation?
Exactly.
Especially if we're noticing like other concerning behaviors too.
Right.
Can you give us some examples of what might constitute a red flag versus a white flag in terms of emotional stability?
Sure. A red flag might be someone who constantly complains about being unfairly treated, or they always seem to have a lot of drama in their relationships.
Okay.
Always blaming others for their problems could be another one.
So if someone consistently sees themselves as the victim, that's a red flag.
Yeah, it could be, yeah.
What would be a white flag? Something that indicates like we should proceed with extreme caution.
White flags are more serious. Things like delusional thinking, self-harm, or threats of violence. Those are definitely cause for concern, and you might want to seek professional help.
Okay, that makes sense. So red flags are about paying attention and maybe adjusting our approach a little bit.
Right.
And white flags are like, okay, we need to get some distance here.
Yes.
Or maybe even seek some professional intervention.
Exactly, yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground already.
Yeah.
The 4 pillars, the mental CAT scan, conversational archaeology, these are great tools. But Lieberman also talks about some interesting statistics.
It does.
Related to emotional stability.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on those?
So statistics can definitely be helpful for understanding trends, but it's super important to remember they're not, like a crystal ball.
Right.
They can't predict individual behavior.
Exactly. We don't want to stereotype or make assumptions about people based on generalization.
Right.
One statistical factor he mentions is family history. Does having a family history of mental health issues automatically mean like you're destined for the same fate?
Absolutely not. While family history can, suggest a predisposition, genes aren't destiny, right? Lifestyle choices, experiences, all play a huge role in shaping our emotional well-being. It's a complex interplay of nature and nurture.
So having a family history of anxiety doesn't necessarily mean you'll develop anxiety.
Exactly.
It just means you might be a little more susceptible.
Right.
What about marital status? Does that factor into the equation?
Statistically speaking, married people tend to report higher levels of happiness and health. But again, it's a broad generalization.
Right.
There are plenty of single people out there who are perfectly content and well-adjusted. And, there are a lot of married people who struggle. So the quality of the relationship really matters far more than, whether you have that piece of paper or not.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So it's not about being married or single.
Right.
It's about the quality of our connections and how supported we feel.
Exactly.
What about religious beliefs? Does that play a role?
Some studies have suggested that religious commitment might correlate with better mental health, probably because of the support system, right? And the meaning-making framework that it often provides.
So having a sense of purpose, belonging to a supportive community,
Yes.
that can be beneficial, regardless of whether it's religion or something else.
Right, exactly. It's about finding what gives your life meaning.
Yeah.
And connecting with other people who share your values.
I love that. Another interesting correlation Lieberman mentions is like creative leanings. Is there a connection between creativity and emotional stability? Are those tortured artist tropes like rooted in reality?
Well, statistically speaking, there might be a link between high creativity and mental health challenges, but we have to be really careful about making generalizations. It's complex. There are a lot of factors involved.
This whole discussion about statistical factors makes me think that while they can be helpful, they don't tell the whole story.
No, they don't.
It's important to avoid oversimplifying things.
Exactly.
Or jumping to conclusions, right?
Right, because every individual is unique. And their emotional journey is shaped by so many things.
We've covered so much fascinating ground in this first part of our deep dive. We've explored the 4 pillars of emotional health. We've learned about the mental CAT scan, conversational archaeology, and even touched on some really intriguing statistical correlations. But there's one more crucial element I want to discuss, and that is resilience.
Yes. Welcome back to our deep dive into emotional stability.
Oh, it's so good to be back.
Last time we were exploring the 4 pillars of emotional health and how to spot emotional footprints using those tools, the mental CAT scan and conversational archaeology.
Oh, I love those. Those tools were amazing. And I'm already starting to notice these little signs.
That's great.
In my everyday interaction. But now I'm curious about the role of genetics. So does having a family history of, say, anxiety automatically mean you're destined to have anxiety too?
That's a really great question, and it's one that comes up a lot. And thankfully, the answer is no.
Okay, good.
Lieberman says that while genes do play a role, he's very clear that genes are not destiny.
Okay.
They provide a blueprint, but how that blueprint unfolds really depends on a complex interplay of your environment, your experiences, and the choices you make.
So, someone could have a genetic predisposition to anxiety, but if they, say, grow up in a really supportive environment and learn healthy coping mechanisms, they might never actually develop an anxiety disorder.
That's exactly right. Think of it this way. It's like having a seed for a plant, right?
Okay.
The seed has the potential to grow into something, but whether it actually grows into a strong, healthy plant depends on the soil, the sunlight, and how much water it gets.
I like that. That's a good analogy.
Yes.
So we can't control the genes we inherit, but we can influence how we respond to those genes, our environment, and, like you said, the choices we make.
Exactly.
But I'm curious, does Lieberman give any specific examples of this interplay between genes and environment?
He does. He discusses this gene called the 5-HTT gene, which is involved in regulating serotonin in the brain.
Okay.
And that's a neurotransmitter that plays a really big role in our moods.
Oh, right. Yeah, I think I remember reading about that.
Yeah.
In one of the articles you sent over. And wasn't there something about different versions of the gene?
Yes. There's a short version and a long version of the 5-HTT gene.
Okay.
And research suggests that, people who inherit the short version might be more vulnerable to stress, anxiety, and depression.
Okay.
While the long version seems to provide a little more protection against those issues.
So basically, if you inherit the short version of that gene, you're just more susceptible to stressful events, but you're not guaranteed to have, say, an anxiety disorder.
You got it.
Okay.
Lieberman really emphasizes this point. It's really important to him. It just means you might need to be a little more mindful, of managing your stress and developing those healthy coping mechanisms.
So it sounds like it's less about good genes versus bad genes and more about just understanding how our genes kind of interact with our environment and the choices we make.
Exactly. And this leads us to a really important question, which is, if genes aren't destiny, what can we do to build up our emotional resilience? What can we do to strengthen those positive environmental influences?
That's a great question. That is the million-dollar question.
It is.
We've unpacked all these building blocks of emotional health. We've explored the fascinating world of genes. And now I really want to learn more about the practical steps we can take to boost our emotional well-being. Can we dive into that more?
Do it.
All right, so welcome back to our deep dive into emotional stability. We've uncovered so much already.
We have.
From the 4 pillars of emotional health to those subtle signs that are revealed through emotional footprints.
Yes.
We even talked about the interplay of genes and environment.
Right.
But now I want to get to the big question. What can we actually do to cultivate greater emotional resilience in our own lives?
That's where the rubber meets the road, right?
Right.
And the good news is that resilience isn't just something you're born with or not.
Oh, okay.
It's something you can develop and strengthen over time.
So it's like a skill.
Exactly.
You can build.
It is, yeah.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me everything.
Right.
Where do we even begin? What are some of those first steps toward building that? What does Lieberman call it?
Emotional Teflon.
Yes, emotional Teflon.
Emotional Teflon.
How do we build that?
Well, self-awareness is the foundation.
Okay.
It's about tuning in to your thoughts and feelings, your behaviors, noticing your patterns. What are the things that trigger you? What helps you feel grounded? What helps you feel centered?
So it's like becoming a detective of our own inner world.
Exactly.
Paying attention to those little cues we might usually ignore.
Exactly.
Right.
Once you have a better understanding of your own, emotional world, you can start to develop healthy coping mechanisms.
Okay, so what are some examples of those healthy coping mechanisms? I'm assuming there's no one-size-fits-all.
Definitely not, no.
Okay.
For some people it's exercise. For other people it's meditation or spending time in nature, journaling, creative expression, or talking to a therapist.
Yeah.
It's really about finding what works for you.
So it's not about waiting until we're, in crisis mode.
Exactly.
It's more about being proactive and building up that resilience muscle.
Exactly.
So that when things get tough, we're ready.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, I like that. And speaking of, support systems, Lieberman also talks about the importance of social connections.
He does, yes.
In a sense, we are social creatures.
We are.
But is it just about having, a ton of friends? Or is there something more to it?
It's about the quality of your connections, not the quantity.
Okay.
So having those people that you can trust, who you can confide in, that you can lean on when things are tough, makes a huge difference.
Absolutely.
People who genuinely care about you.
Right.
And who you can be your authentic self around. And remember, it's not just about receiving support, it's also about giving support.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
So being there for others can actually strengthen our own resilience?
It does. It does.
I never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
All of this is such great advice, but it also sounds like a lot of work.
It can be, yeah.
Are there any shortcuts to building emotional resilience? I don't know, quick hacks or something when we're feeling overwhelmed?
I wish there were, but, there's no magic bullet.
Okay.
There are simple little things that you can do every day that can help you shift your mindset.
Yeah.
One of my favorites is practicing gratitude.
Oh, okay, gratitude. How does that build resilience? Kind of seems counterintuitive.
I know, right?
Especially when you're struggling.
But when you focus on what you're grateful for, it shifts your attention away from all the negative stuff.
Yeah.
And it helps you appreciate all the good things in your life.
Okay.
Even when things are tough.
Right.
It can be as simple as just taking a few minutes each day to write down 3 things you're grateful for.
Oh, wow. So even when things feel really hard, we can still find things to be grateful for.
You can.
It's about, retraining our brains to look for those silver linings.
It is.
What are some other, small but mighty practices that we can incorporate?
Another one is focusing on what you can control.
Okay.
When you're stressed, it's really easy to get caught up in worrying about things you have absolutely no control over.
Yeah.
And that just makes you feel more anxious, right?
Right.
So instead, try redirecting your energy towards things you can influence. Your attitude, your choices, your actions.
So it's about taking ownership of our own lives.
Exactly.
Even in challenging circumstances.
Yes.
Not getting bogged down by the things we can't change.
Exactly.
This has been such a great deep dive.
It has.
We've learned so much about emotional stability, the tools for assessing it, and most importantly, how to strengthen our own resilience.
It's been a pleasure.
I agree. And to our listeners, before we sign off, here's a little challenge for you. What are you grateful for today?
Good question.
And what is one little step, even just a tiny step, you can take right now to cultivate your own emotional resilience? Until next time, happy diving.